Good morning. Welcome to our second program of Summer Forum for this year at the First Unitarian Church. My name is Kathy Chambliss, and before I introduce our speaker today, I would like to show appreciation again for our musicians. Nick Anderson and David Owens. Just a reminder about our format today, it's kind of loud, that we will have a presentation, and following that we will have an offering where we'll pass the plate, and we'll have another musical interlude during that time. Then we will have questions and answers where anyone in the audience can ask Mary questions. So be thinking about it, what you want to ask. We will have 2 microphones, one on each side. We ask you to raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you. So our speaker this morning is Mary Dickson. Mary is a program host for KUED Channel 7, the program Contact. She's continuing to do that, to host that weekly program, although this year she retired from her regular other responsibilities as a producer, host, and general all-around essential talent at KUED Channel 7. So Mary's topic today, her subject will be hosting international students, opening my home, my heart and my home to strangers. Mary has hosted international students from the University of Utah for many years, and she's also been a host for visitors, international visitors from the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy. So we are very happy to welcome Mary Dickson. Thank you.
I decided to use the God pulpit so you can see me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I have so many friends here, so it's really great. As Kathy said, I retired, or I like to call it I rewired, because I read this Mary Oliver poem that ends with, "Tell me, what are you going to do with this one wild and precious life?" And I thought, I'm going to live it. So that's what I'm doing, which, because this is the one big discovery I have made in this wild and precious life, that the greatest adventures and the richest experiences always begin by saying yes. And one of my greatest adventures began when I said yes to taking in a young Muslim student from Saudi Arabia. That was 10 years ago. And it began what's probably the richest, most rewarding chapter of my life. I've learned the importance of welcoming people into my heart and home and connecting with them wherever yes takes me. So I've always loved meeting people from other countries, whether when traveling or when at home, having foreign visitors for a meal, and sometimes having them spend a few nights or weeks. And I see all of these as small acts of citizen diplomacy, and they have all enriched my life beyond any expectation. My mother, I think, started it. She was a great example. She was incredibly social, and she was always picking up people and bringing them home for dinner. I remember the time she met a young woman from Switzerland at Arbex while they were shopping, and she brought her home. So she became our friend. My father, who was a professor at the university, would always bring his international students home to eat with us. So I always loved learning about their cultures and traditions. And as Kathy said, I've enjoyed hosting visitors from around the world for dinner through the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy. And those dinners always turn out to be truly memorable experiences, always. There was a Thanksgiving after my sister died, when a group of women from Cambodia and other war-torn countries joined us for our first Thanksgiving without her. And we sat around the fireplace and shared our stories. So as sad and depressed as I was after losing my sister, I couldn't help but think that my loss paled in comparison to what one woman and her family experienced under the Khmer Rouge. So we shared our grief, we shared our joy, and it became this evening of true healing and thanks. Then there was the unforgettable dinner with the Russian journalist. We'd had appetizers and salads. I went to get the meal out of the oven. the chicken, and it was raw because my chicken was broken. So I pulled my friend Ursula into the kitchen, and I said, okay, I don't know what to do. We have nothing to eat. And she said, don't worry, I'll take it to my house and bake it. So I had to come up with why dinner was so delayed. So I told them that in America we had this great tradition of progressive dinners where you would have different courses at different homes. I said, and aren't you lucky? You get to see 2 American homes. So I did what any good host would do. I plied them with vodka for about an hour. And then we went to my friend's home, and they were in pretty good spirits by then. So we had this wonderful evening of drunken ballads. They came back to my house for dessert, and they were thrilled to learn about the progressive dinner. So I hope they're doing that back in Moscow. I've also experienced world history up close through some of the visitors. A group from Egypt was at my house the night the Arab Spring broke, and one of them was frantic to get in touch with her family and kept trying and trying, and she finally reached them, so she knew she could relax. So she asked if we could start the hookah on the porch and then go bowling, which we did. It really helped her at a time of crisis. I had a group from Morocco that included a young man who had played a major role in the Arab Spring there, largely through Facebook. The government kept closing his accounts. He kept opening new ones. I had an Iraqi journalist ask me how she could apply for political asylum and how she could get her daughter here as I drove her back to her hotel. Another time, I befriended a young journalist from Pakistan who told me about receiving death threats from the Taliban, and they had put an explosive device in her car. So she also was asking me how to seek political asylum. I'm happy to say she's now safe and studying in Germany, and I am still in touch with her. I see Mohammed Mushib out here, a wonderful man who called me one day at KUED and wanted to know if he could meet because he'd been a journalist, and we became friends. His family's come to my house for dinner. I've gone to their home, and when they got citizenship, it was incredibly moving to be at that ceremony and watch them, and I still look at those pictures, Mohammed. So, and I've been lucky enough to dine and discuss foreign affairs with mullahs from Afghanistan, reporters from Korea, dancers from Ecuador, and I've taken them to the mountains, I've taken them to the Great Salt Lake, to concerts, to plays, many they didn't understand, and all sorts of places. And they've all provided me these incredible insights into their countries and cultures, and I hope I did some of the same for them. When I've traveled overseas, I have depended on the kindness of strangers myself and been a guest in other people's homes. And it's really helped me realize how much those invitations and opening your home mean to people. The kindness of strangers is such a gift, and everywhere I go, I'm lucky enough to meet incredible people. In China, years ago, I spent this wonderful evening with the family of the bellboy at our hotel. And this was great. He pulled out his guitar, he wanted to play for us, and he sang in his broken English the Sound of Music songs, which was really cute. He even tried some Willie Nelson. Anyway, his mother just kept plying us with food, and he kept playing songs he thought we would appreciate. So that was cute. In Egypt, I spent some time with a family who had opera connections through my brother, and they took us to their summer home out on their boat on the Red Sea. They prepared this huge feast for us. The food just kept coming out. And then they took us into Cairo to show us things that we never would have seen on our own. And I so appreciated them. I'm still in touch with them, and they keep me abreast of their daughter and what's happening with her. She's now a highly regarded opera singer, so they send little videos. It's wonderful. And then there was the time in Ireland. I remember this. We'd driven for hours and hours looking for a place to stay because we didn't know it was a holiday weekend, so everything was booked. We pretty much resigned ourselves to sleeping in the car. And then we thought, well, we'll try this one last B&B. And the man came out. He was so sweet. He said, well, I don't have any rooms, but my cousin Mary Mullen, she might have a room you can sleep in. And so he drove us there. And I'll be damned if Mary Mullen didn't have a room we could sleep in. And her kids sat around and told us stories about how we should stay off the canals, which we were going to do, because he kept saying, you don't know, they're pirates, they'll cut your ears off. So we went on the canals anyway, but then they took us down to the social hall where everybody went. I mean, old people, young people, everybody, and we just danced with those kids and ended up staying up late into the night talking. And I stayed in touch with her for a long time, too. So I have just spent so many beautiful hours with people wherever I've gone. I've visited with journalists and artists in Cuba and Vietnam, with activists, anti-nuclear activists in Japan, with a Sikh policeman and his entourage in India, and I saw them all fanned around him with their weapons hidden. So he was apparently a really big deal. There was a farmer in Ireland most recently, and he drove me barefoot because in a mad dash to the cliffs of Moher, he said, so you won't be missing the light. The sunset's amazing. I just jumped in his car, and off we went, and I ran up the hill till I couldn't breathe, and my chest was thumping, but I got the best sunset of my whole trip. Or there was a woman I met on a walk in Liscannor, and she took me to her garage that she'd converted to a little art studio. It was tiny, but it was so sweet. There were these gorgeous photos everywhere that she had taken, and she was so kind. There was one I loved, and she just rummaged through everything and found me a print and said, here, you take this one home with you. It'll remind you of the light. So I've just really had some incredible experiences. I know Tim Chambliss sent me a note yesterday, and he quoted Rick Steves, that mentally and intellectually, international travel is intensive education. And he's right. If you're a curious person at all, it's just the best way to learn about and experience the world. And you never know where the path will take you or what's around the corner, which is the great joy of it. So I always think before I leave, I wonder what great adventures I'll have. Who will I meet this time? But of course, the most intensive, the most satisfying cultural exchange I've ever experienced is having international students from the Middle East and China live with me. The stories of my experiences with those kids and what we learned from each other could fill a book. In fact, I spent a year in a workshop in Oregon writing that book. I called it The 8th Avenue Kingdom of Boys. And I finished that after I retired. Well, I mean, it's in pretty good shape. It's not really finished. But those boys became far more than visitors. They became family. In fact, the first 3 who lived with me the longest at the same time liked to call us our little family. I'd ask them if they wanted to have people over. They'd say, let's just keep it to our little family. And I learned from them that there's no such thing as the other, that the great joy there is in opening your heart and home to strangers. I'm going to read you just the introduction to that. It's short, don't worry. Okay. When I left my husband of 2 decades and found myself living alone in our large empty house with an even larger mortgage, I took in international students. First came Badr, the 18-year-old Muslim son of a polygamous major general from Saudi Arabia. A few months later, Wei, a 19-year-old self-proclaimed atheist from China. And 6 months later, another Saudi boy, Fahad, who looked like a cross between Selma Hayek and Michael Jackson, and whom I was sure was gay until I caught him sneaking girls into the house. They came for a year, for a month, or we will see Mehdi, but ended up staying their entire college careers. We celebrated holidays and birthdays with a house full of friends, mine and theirs, and great fanfare. We went hiking, made treks to the national parks, and took countless trips together, including one to China to visit Wei's family. I helped them learn English, taught them to drive and cook, and ran interference as they navigated the ins and outs of relationships, American life, and straddling 2 cultures. They taught me to smoke hookah, dance the dubka, master chopsticks, and turned my basement into an Arab lounge. They sat with me as my father died, helped me bring my mother home for visits from assisted living, and became astute observers of my baffling relationship with Mr. Big, my not yet ex-husband, from whom I was legally separated. In their country, my Saudi boys weren't allowed to shake hands with or even see an uncovered woman to whom they weren't related. But as the months passed, They never left home without kissing me on top of the head, a gesture reserved for the mothers they revered. Each night before he went to bed, Wei, who had been shipped off to boarding school at age 11 by parents who are business people, they be busy, would call out from his room, "Good night, Mary, I love you." It was like the Waltons at our house, except for when it wasn't. Our almost 5 years together on 8th Avenue brought the expected challenges of language barriers and blended cultures, sibling rivalry, and raging hormones, but they were some of the happiest years of my life. When each boy left, he took a piece of my heart. I had initially opened my home to them to pay my mortgage and quell the fear of living alone. What I never expected to find was the family I craved. So my first experience with international students was actually an adorable young girl from Japan. She came just for a 3-week program, and she basically spoke 2 words of English, cute and wow. My old English sheepdog was cute. My giant husky was cute. Bryce National Park, wow. I took her to plays she didn't understand, to dinners with friends, and to the Shakespeare Festival to see my 11-year-old nephew in, well, she called him cute, in Secret Garden, wow. And when her 3 weeks were up, she left a card on my pillow. I'm sure it was written with a teacher's help. Didn't include one cute or wow. She wrote, "I am cheered by your smile since the first time I met you at the airport. A rainbow touches the earth in 2 places, where you are and where I am." Yeah, sweet. Okay, so almost as soon as she boarded the plane, I got another call from the university program. And the woman asked me, "Okay, are you ready for another student?" I said, "Oh, of course." And she said, "Well, I have a Muslim boy, and I can't find anyone who will take him." And I said, "Well, of course. I mean, yes, of course. Yes, I'll take him." Because I thought, okay, I am going to show this boy, post 9/11, that Americans can be open and accepting, and I'm going to be the perfect ambassador. I'm going to be his mentor and his friend, his guide to American life, and I'm going to show him a world he'd never seen. But I was worried about him coming to live with me, a single woman. I said, because I was only supposed to have girls, and especially a young Saudi boy. I said, "Okay, do his parents know? Are they okay with it?" She goes, oh yeah, they're fine. And then I said, "Okay, I have 2 big dogs," because I know that Muslims don't like being around dogs. And I said, "Is that okay?" She goes, "Oh, he's fine with it." I said, "Oh, okay." And then I thought about the other things. I said, "Okay, does he care if I have alcohol in my house? Does it bother him that I'm not covered?" And she said, "Oh, you know what? They're fine as long as you get them before they're 24. They're more open-minded. He'll be fine." So I thought, okay, we're going to do this. And when I went to pick him up, I knew not to offer my hand, and he didn't say much, but I could tell he was confident, not shy, and he carried himself with this air of nobility that I found a little intimidating. And when we got home, I could also tell he was not comfortable with dogs. He was only supposed to stay a year, but he ended up being with me his entire time at the university. And by the time he left, he was my dearest friend. He would hug me all the time. He would take care of me. He even sat with my husky after he had hip surgery to comfort him. And I said, "Oh, look at you with the dog." And he said, "Mary, I'm only human. What can I do?" So a few months after he had moved in, the university calls me again, and they say, "Okay, we have a Chinese student who's just looking for a month of home stay. Will you take him?" And of course I said, "Yeah, sure." That's when Nian Wei, who barely spoke English, came to stay. And he was so afraid of the dogs that he ran up the stairs, and the next morning he tiptoes down, he peeks around the corner, he goes, "Mary, are dogs still crazy?" I said, "I'll wait. You can wait a couple days before you meet him. I'll put him out." Yeah, he ended up asking me if he could take the old English sheepdog to China. I said, no, you can't take him. But anyway, he came for a month, but at the end of that month, he said, "Mary, can I stay 1 more month?" I said, "Sure." End of that month, he says, "Mary, can I stay 1 more month?" I said, "Sure." At the end of that month, he said, "Mary, my mother thinks you're a very nice lady. Can I live here?" And Of course I said yes, which he did live here for 4.5 years. Fahad, also from Saudi Arabia, did amazing impersonations of all of us and all my friends. They were hilarious. And he came to live with us the following fall. He stayed 5 years. Then Baderstran Ahmed, who was a PhD student from Jordan, pulled me into the kitchen one night when he was over for dinner, and he said, Mary, do you have an extra room? I said, well, actually, I'm all out. But, oh, wait, I have a TV room. We could turn it into a bedroom. Can I see it? I show it to him. He goes, I'll take it. I said, okay, when do you want to move in? Tomorrow. Okay, so he came to live with us. But these experiences with the boys have really, like I said, they've been some of the best of my life. We've laughed and cried together. We spent hours talking and discussing their worlds and views. So I got to watch their evolution from speaking almost no English to being so fluent we could have deep conversations. I watched them on their journey from adolescence to manhood, which was a real gift. And they became the children I never had. And we supported each other in very profound ways. Like I said, Way and Fahad sat with me as my father died, watched him take his last breath. They don't like seeing death, but they did it for me. When they came with me to his funeral in a Mormon chapel, people really stared. They were confused. And I introduced them as, well, these are my 3 sons. And one man just looked at me and said, I'd like to see their father. And Wei was with me when my baby niece, Sophia, was born. She's 5 now, but she still asks all the time if we can call baby Wei, because that's what she calls him. Although last week she decided we could now call him adult Wei. And some of my biggest adventures with them came traveling overseas to meet their families and friends. Bader took me to Dubai and Abu Dhabi for vacation. I couldn't get into Saudi Arabia. And it was really a luxury to be with someone who knew his way around and who could take me to out-of-the-way places, like a Bedouin fair in the desert, and then the camel racetrack that his friend ran, also in the desert. And it was pretty remarkable. Then the really great trip, though, was, like I said, that trip that Fahad and I took with Wei to China to visit his family. And the 3 of us, believe me, were quite the sensation. In this part of China that didn't see many foreigners, especially, Anglos or Arabs. And Wei's mother was so grateful that she hosted dinner after dinner for us and brought out every relative and friend she had. She took us to stunning national parks. She bought me more clothes and shoes because she knew they had my size than I could even pack in my suitcase. And she spoke hardly any English, would just hug me and cry, and always ask, happy? More happy? And I was more happy. And then when he got engaged, Fahad asked me if I would stand next to his mother at his wedding, which is the ultimate tribute. And he just said, oh, they'll wonder who the blonde lady is. And I'll say, my American mom. I didn't get to go to that wedding because Saudi Arabia does not issue visas to American moms. And I wasn't going for Hajj. I wasn't going for business, so I could not get a visa. I did go to Ahmed's wedding in Jordan last summer. His family welcomed me like I was visiting royalty. They gave me an apartment. They took me to Petra, the Dead Sea, and even across the Syrian border, which was a little scary. I had to leave my passport with armed guards. But I said yes, why not? Then I could say I'd gone to Syria. And over the years, with those boys, I learned how much they cherish family, how incredibly respectful, kind, generous, and grateful they are. And I tell you, I miss them terribly. Luckily, we have Skype and WhatsApp and email, and even better, international flights. Bader's been back 3 times for extended vacations. When Wei got his master's from NYU, I was there to cheer him on, and he introduced me to his friends as, this is my mom, because his parents didn't come. They'd be busy. They'd be business people. He's back in Shanghai, and he calls me all the time, for advice and just to talk. And the last time he called me, he said, "I never feel at home since I left your house." Yeah. Fahad, who's now married and back in Jeddah, FaceTimed me just last week so I could watch his little boy walk. That was amazing. The boys' friends also became my friends. I stay in touch with them. I flew to DC when one of Batter's friends brought his family for vacation, and I can't remember where we were, but his mother saw an RV, and she said, Mary, I want you to take me in one of these around America for a month. I buy the benzene. Maybe I'll do that now that I'm retired. I could do that. And so the boys and their friends have sent me their brothers to spend summers so they could practice their English. And during his summer stay, Batter's brother, who was dying to be an artist, so I enrolled him in art classes, he asked me, he would always ask me, can I take the dogs for a walk? I thought, oh, bless this boy for loving my dogs. And I asked him, so where are you taking them? He goes, to Liberty Park, to fish. And I'm like, Mossad, there are no fish in Liberty Park. He goes, Mary, for the girls. So from Kazi knows my dogs are real chick magnets. And from then on, he just said, I'm going fishing, where's the leash? So anyway, through all of these wonderful times, I should tell you this one. One of the boys sent his brother one summer, and then last summer, I had just gotten home from a writing retreat in Montana in a very Zen state, and that brother is in my living room. And I'm like, how did you get in? He goes, through the dog door. I'm staying till September. Luckily, in 2 weeks, he said, Mary, I have very bad news. I said, what? What happened? My father called. I have to go home tomorrow. It's like, oh. Okay, I just got back from Ireland, again, in a very Zen state. A knock on the door. It's him telling me he's staying till September. Yeah, I said, I'm not going to be here. Anyway, they just keep coming back. And I have to say that my view of China and Saudi Arabia and all these other countries has just radically changed after sharing my home and life with these remarkable young men. I fell in love with them and their cultures, not through the slanted perspective of media, but through actually living with them. And when you get to know someone really well, those cultural differences just break down so fast. They've changed my view and appreciation of their countries and cultures, and I know I've changed theirs of America and Americans. I think it's a kind of citizen diplomacy that's so incredibly important, especially now when hate and fear reign. And it's a kind of diplomacy that comes from opening your home, your heart, and your mind to other people. I just passionately believe that if there were more person-to-person encounters, what a different place our world would be. There would be no one who would be considered the other. And I always love this quote from Bertrand Russell, who said, love is wise, hatred is foolish. And I've been very lucky to love all these incredible people. Thanks.
now it's time for Q&A, and Mary, would you like to stand up here?
Okay.
So, and we're gonna, use this mic.
Okay.
And,
I have to pull it down. Of course I do.
And we're going to see if there are questions. Okay, if
Okay.
you, up there, could you come down and use the mic? Yeah. Sorry.
You can just yell.
You need to come down.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. That was so interesting. What I'd really love to know is your biggest aha moment when it came to, going through cultural clashes and something you had no idea. What was your biggest experience?
Oh my
really opened your eyes?
God, that's hard. That's hard. You know what? I can't, there were so many. I can't think of the biggest. I think probably the biggest was the first time Batter reached out and touched me because my dog was not doing well, and when he reached out and touched me to comfort me, I thought, oh my gosh, everyone's alike. He sees this animal that he doesn't really want to be around, but his heart goes out to him and to me. He just wanted to comfort me, and that's when I thought, there are no differences. Yeah.
Question here.
I hope this isn't too mundane a question, but you obviously have extra rooms, but you probably have extra bathrooms too, I assume.
I have 2 bathrooms. We shared, and it got to a point, we got so familiar that especially Fahad, when I took my makeup off at night, he would always come and sit on the bathtub to talk to me. That's when we had our deepest conversations while I took off my face. And he would always say, Mary, why do you put all this stuff on your face? You don't need all these lotions and potions. I said, oh, yeah, I do.
But the rest of my mundane question is, do you get a stipend for their food and everything? I mean, boys.
Yes, yes. They paid me. But as my friend said, you probably spent more on them than they paid you. So it kind of came out in the wash. But yeah, they paid me. That's why I started taking them in. I needed money. I took in boarders.
I had a question about visas. So when
Yeah.
you talk about them coming back to visit you, is it getting more and more difficult for them to get visas?
I've been worried about that, but they've gotten in. Although after Trump did his ban, I had a boy from Qatar living with me then, and they weren't on the list, but his cousin who had gone home, and that happened while he was gone, they would not let him back in, even though he had a visa. And the guy just said to him, he said, we're not on the list. And the guy said, I just feel like being mean. And he had to go home. And so then he was afraid to ever come back. But I do worry it's going to be harder for them to come. So far, it hasn't. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and talking to us, Mary.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I think we ought to make you an honorary Unitarian because you live our 7 principles. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
What I'm interested in was your trip to China.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that with an Arab boy and a Chinese boy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, people stared at us wherever we went, and people came up and always wanted pictures with us. So it was pretty fun. The best thing was, it was Way's birthday, so his mother took us to a nightclub where they had these 4 little stages around, and Fahad got up and started dancing like a maniac. I mean, everybody was filming him and taking pictures of him. He became the entertainment that night. That was fun. But he was really, he wouldn't eat the food. Fahad wouldn't eat the food because he was sure it all contained pork, so he wouldn't eat it. And he ended up having scrambled eggs the entire time we were there. And then at one point he said, Mary, don't fall asleep. They will eat anything. Lock your door. Yeah, he was a bit of a racist, okay. Yeah, no, that was an amazing experience, especially to meet all his family, all his cousins. And everywhere they took us, if you looked at anything too long and thought it was nice, they would buy it for you. They were just so incredibly generous and wonderful. Yeah.
What was the feeling of China as it demands?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, we would his mother rented a van to take us to these national parks. We would get on, and we never had any idea how long it was going to take or how long we were going to be gone. We would just show up at these amazing places. And one of them was the place where Avatar was filmed with those giant, whatever they are. I mean, it was just so stunning. And it's like we took this tram. It's the longest one in the world. It took like an hour to get to the very top. And his mother just closed her eyes like this the whole time. She was terrified of heights. But we got up there. It was absolutely spectacular. And you're walking around. At one point, there's this little concrete walkway on these sheer cliff walls that go down so far you can't see the bottom. And you're kind of up in the mist. And all I could think was, oh, I just hope they built these well. I hope they built these well. Let's go fast. It was immense, and it was incredibly beautiful. I had no idea how beautiful it was. Yeah.
If one of us wanted to host someone, what's the process for going through the university and getting
Okay,
an application,
that's
all that?
good. I can't even remember now, Tim, the name of, it used to be Global Pathways, but I don't know what they have now.
Well,
what do they have now?
Well, the College of Health, University of Utah has been one. The International Student Center has been another link. The English Language Institute at the University of Utah is a third. We've had students staying in our home for 39 years, 29 countries, from all those sources. And then also there's the word of mouth, as you've experienced.
I know, word of mouth, boy, I have them showing up all the time. I had somebody call me and say, I will give you $1,000 to have a room right now. It's like, well, I don't know who you are. I am Mushib's cousin, you know. Okay, good enough. Come on over. Yeah.
So I have a question, and you can pass it to Louise. I have a question I'm curious about your conversations with these young men who come with attitudes about women and about the role of women in society, and what your conversations are like, and your observations about how they may change.
It's very interesting, because when they first came, I'd ask the Saudi boys about how women were treated there, and he goes, no, they like it this way. They don't like to drive. They would rather we drive them. It was always, no, this is something they like that's good for them. And by the time they left, they were, I think was that before the Saudi government let women drive? But they viewed women much differently, especially after living with me. And they would always tell me, you're the bravest woman I know. I said, why am I so brave? You live alone. You take care of everything. I said, well, so do most of my friends. And they just thought I was incredibly brave and strong, and they really admired that. And one of them, this is interesting, because when he got home, he treated his sisters, he told me, much differently, and wanted them to be more independent. And he told me he was not going to have an arranged marriage. He would pick his own wife, thank you very much. And he wanted someone who spoke English and had lived abroad. So, he changed the most radically of them all. And I remember him telling me when he went back, they all had a really hard time going home. It was a really hard transition after being with all this freedom to go home and live with their families again. And one of them just said that his friends told him he thought weird. After he came home, they said, you think weird. And he said, I told them, when all men think alike, no one is thinking. Because that was his Winston Churchill quote I always told him. I made him read all sorts of things. He devoured what I gave him. And he really opened his mind the most of all. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask pretty much the same thing Kathy just asked. So, but it's great to think that you've introduced some new thinking into some of those countries that don't yet. Doors open to much.
One of Batter's favorite things I gave him to read was John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. He loved it.
Not something they usually read.
Yeah, he should just move back.
Hi, I don't really have a question, just a request. If maybe we could put together the contact information for the U, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then put it in the next torch or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll put something together and put it in the torch.
Great.
I kind of want to follow up on the flip side of that about what they learned. Getting ready to marry a Romanian and learning a lot about their family, of course, post-communist. I've been amazed at what I have been able to learn empathetically without trying to impose the great American wisdom on the rest of the world. You know, we kind of conceive that we're offering this beautiful image of the top of the white pillar, and I've found myself rethinking that position quite a lot as I've tried to ingratiate myself into his culture. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I learned so much from them. I mean, one thing, especially the Saudis would disappear till like 4 or 5 a.m. And I always thought, what are these wild kids doing? And then they invited me to come one night. And they made this huge feast. They put down hefty bags and put a roll of aluminum foil in the middle and just piled it with basmati rice, with chicken. And we sat and ate with our hands. And then I learned what they do at night all night. They talk. They have conversations. They play cards. They eat. They smoke hookah. They have dates. They have Arabic coffee. And I just thought, this is such an incredible way to spend time. They really loved just spending time with their friends. And they would sit on my porch for hours with their friends, to like the wee hours of the morning. And I always worried it would bother the neighbors, but the neighbors always joked that we had Arab neighborhood watch. I mean, they caught 2 people trying to break into cars across the street. But yeah, I just learned from them this simplicity and joy in just sitting with people and talking. I mean, you didn't have to have devices. You didn't have to watch a movie. You just talked for hours and laughed. And they had the best senses of humor. They were very funny. But yeah, I kind of learned to appreciate that with them.
I want to echo what you're talking about. When my mother, this was about 30 years ago, when my mother became elderly and she didn't want to leave her house, we asked the university to send over a student to live with her for free, just to be there in case my mother fell or something happened. And so the first boy that came was from Iran, and then they wanted to send another person, so they sent a boy from Jordan. So my mother was living with these 2 guys, and they just, all 3 of them, they just had a party. My mother loved sports, and they would sit and watch the Jazz games, and they would watch the University of Utah football games, and they'd cook for her, and my mother also smoked, and they'd all 3 just be smoking and talking. And I'd walk in the house, and there'd be 3 or 4 people from Tehran and 3 or 4 people from Jordan, and my mother was in the middle of it all, just having a ball.
She loved it, yeah.
And it worked out. When she finally did have a heart attack, they were there. They called the ambulance, and they called me, and they went to the hospital to visit her while she was in the hospital. It just really worked out.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's beautiful. And this is the other thing you learn from these kids. They were also respectful of older people and their elders. And they couldn't believe how American kids talk to their parents. But they were so sweet with my father and my mother. They were just incredibly respectful. And they don't care about age. They just don't care. And they like to have a good time, like your mom learned. That's beautiful, yeah.
Mary, I have 2 observations with regard to Saudi Arabia. We had a young 20-year-old male named Badr.
Yeah.
He first arrived in our home. He's in the kitchen when our 8-pound mini dachshund walks in, wagging her tail. He catapulted himself up onto a high chair. Later on, before he left her home, he was carrying her around the house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. At the same time, I remember when Kathy was out of town, we had 3 international students living in our home. 1 from China, young woman, 1 from Japan, young woman, and bought her mail from Saudi Arabia. I have a tendency to invite PBS NewsHour into our home at dinner. And the conversation was about whether or not women should be allowed to drive.
Oh, yeah.
The one country in the world that until now recently is allowed to prohibited women from driving was Saudi Arabia. 3 women were being interviewed, one from a remote site in Saudi Arabia. And I remember him saying, quite seriously, this is against God's will.
Wow.
Women should not be allowed to drive. I thought, aha, this is a teaching moment. Now, normally in our home, I'm the one that cleans up. Everybody else disappears. Suddenly, young woman from Japan, China, they start doing my job of cleaning up at dinner. And I tried to not give a 50-minute hour, but engage in a dialogue with this young man. And we eventually agreed in a gentle way, agree to disagree, but we learned from each other. He had his logic. Why? You know, and I think he heard what I was saying about the fact that maybe women do have a right to freedom and agility, and maybe in this sense, the right to drive. So those 2 moments with that young man, we learned a lot from each other.
Oh, yeah. Well, this was cute. Bader would cook these incredible meals for me. And I said, are you going to cook at home? He goes, no, and do not tell them I cook. Because he says, men are not for the kitchen. But he cooked all the time, and he even cleaned my house for me a lot. Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking for that next question. I see a hand right there.
Were there any common preconceptions that these students came to your home?
Oh, so many. They were sure America was so violent and they'd get shot with guns. They said their mothers didn't want them to come because they were afraid they'd be shot. They had this perception that Americans were incredibly selfish, that they banished their children from the house at age 18, they forced them out, that it was a very violent place and not safe at all. Yeah.
Over the years, we've had a number of students who inquired before living in our home, do we have guns in the house?
Wow. China,
Japan.
Yeah.
We have guns in the house. I've indicated, no, we do not even have a water gun. We have dachshunds. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question, as a journalist, how have these experiences, these international experiences, both vicariously in your home when you travel, but also the physical traveling throughout the world, impacted you in your role as being a journalist for public television and so forth?
Okay, you really realize that the story you get through the media is so slanted, and you see so clearly the Islamophobia in the reporting, and I just will never forget, you watch TV reports, and this was especially during the Arab Spring, and every time you'd see Arabs, they were like, rah, 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 and I thought, you're really painting a bad picture. And that's been one of the biggest things for me, is kind of fighting that Islamophobia. I just feel intensely protective of these people and their culture, because I don't think Americans even try to understand them, and I don't think the media helps. So, yeah, it really makes you see that.
Are there any last questions? We're coming up on 11 o'clock.
Let's give Mary a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. This was really, really enjoyable. Love the conversation.